Welcome to the first season finale of X-Men 97, episode 10 of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men animated recap podcast. I'm JC.
Period.
It's been an emotional week for this to all go down, and I don't think we need to promote anything. I think we enjoy what we got out of this. So.
Yeah. And I'm Rod. I agree. And also, I don't know, there's just this really interesting sense of closure, which I don't even know if I've had in actual life, let alone a show. And also, you might hear some anecdotes from us. We attended the finale watch party with the cast and crew and friends last night.
Yeah, friends and family party, basically.
Yeah, and it was fantastic. But we got to see the show a couple times because of that. And minor spoilers, it didn't disappoint anybody, I don't think. I think the only people who were disappointed in the finale were the ones who weren't happy with anything anyway.
They weren't gonna be happy regardless.
The real life Friends of Humanity people.
Yeah.
So Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we're going back and watching every single X-Men animated episode we can find. The podcast started with the original 1992 X-Men the animated series, building up to this moment, the first season of X-Men 97, which sounds surreal to say. We spent 2 fucking years doing everything else, and then we were in the show, and it's the first chapter is finally, over is not the right word, it's wrapped, because, we were going to get into it. So some quick reminders, we're a recap show about an episode that aired less than a week ago. There will be spoilers. If you don't want spoiled for you, pause the podcast, watch the episode, and come back. We are currently not sponsored by or affiliated with Marvel Animation, Disney, or Disney Plus in any way.
Or I guess I should also put Hulu formally into the script now, because there's all these bundle things that are happening.
Right.
3 months from now, like, you will get this HBO Max and Paramount all together. So we got cable again.
Isn't it funny? There's 2 big bundle services now.
They're both houses. Cable light.
Yeah.
You
have to choose a side.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Twitter, and Facebook. And make sure that you are following us on your favorite podcast services. Now on to the show. Today, we are talking about Season 1, Episode 10, titled Tolerance is Extinction, Part 3. It aired on May 15th, 2024, and sits at a 9.5 star rating on IMDb, tied with Part 2. Mm-hmm. So these are the second highest rated episodes of the entire season. Remember, it's still taking home the gold on this one.
That is so poetic how that landed.
Yeah.
Because they wrote perfect TV. They had a real, climax in the middle, but it didn't get worse as it went on and then just ended. You know, you and I were talking at 12:31 on Wednesday morning.
41 because it was a 40-minute episode.
Oh, that's right. Okay. And about how we like that we as an audience got closure, even if the characters in the show didn't necessarily. It's a really good balanced season finale.
Yeah, and we'll obviously get into this in the latter part of the episode when we hit it, but it ends as this story itself was bookended. Everything that we started from the beginning to the end closed out that narrative. Whereas, sometimes you get these cliffhangers that are the continuation of the existing story, as opposed to being a teaser for the next story. And I think that's where they nailed it.
Yeah, and they spawned 4 or 5 potential new stories.
Not wrong.
Just full disclosure, I've had a really long week with projects I've been working on. So when I got home today, I took a nap instead of rewatched it. But I've seen it twice, and I also figured that most of this episode will be JC listing the cameos, and that itself might take an hour.
That was the one thing I actually was not going to play the game of who are these people today.
I do have my little bit of notes are the screenshots that I would need to look at for, even if it wasn't the game of okay, there's a lot to remember here. And I'm not going to remember the writing, but I have photos.
Good.
But I think it was mostly that, though. If you had to do an elevator description of this episode, I think it would be cameos and just a lot of vibes.
Yep. And very intense extended fight choreo.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Because there are moments where the fight choreo is going for 20, 30 seconds without needing to explain everything that's going on with it. And it's all beautiful and we love it. So there's no complaint about that being the choice they made. But there's, shockingly, for a episode that is 10 minutes longer, I had fewer notes on this than I did on Remember It.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because
even though my notebook is completely out of order now, which Rod heard me venting about earlier.
So it's funny you say that about the fight scenes, because yes, I agree. The fight scenes were incredible. And when we were watching with everybody last night, it really made it feel like a sporting thing, sports ball thing or whatever. Actually, you know what it really reminded me of is like when I went to see bar wrestling with you years ago.
Yeah.
So I never had been before and since. So it's my point of reference. Like being at a wrestling match, because it was just like, oh yeah. And I was standing with my buddy Ron Wasserman, who obviously wrote the theme song to X-Men 92, 97, and this podcast theme song with me, which we can get into that later. He ended up being at the screening with us.
And that was the first time I've seen Ron in person since we've started this project. Oh, yeah. So I wanted to specifically thank him for doing that with you, because that's still like we talk about. If our 10-year-old selves knew what we knew now and what was going to happen with cool things in our life, I never would have predicted that. And when I share that story with friends, it's like, are you fucking kidding me? The guy who made that song did your podcast theme song? I was like, yes, with my co-host, and they crushed it.
Yeah, he was super grateful for hearing that from you. And also, you mentioned 10-year-old. Also, another like little bombshell put in there. Ron and one half of the Newton brothers were talking, and I mentioned, oh yeah, I'll never forget hearing that, dancing around in my living room. I was like 10, 11 years old. And Ron was like, well, thanks for reminding me you were fucking 10 when I was working. Like,
yeah, as a professional.
Anyways, I mentioned all that because I was standing with Ron watching the episode, but as like when the opening previously on was on, so Ron hasn't seen the whole show yet. Mm-hmm. I think he's seen screenshots of what I sent him when
we send him shit.
Yeah, and he was like, "Oh, everybody tells me that the fight scenes are really good in this." I'm like, "Oh yeah, they're pretty great." Anticipating some good ones in this one, and it turns out it was like half fighting.
Yep.
So as we were watching, he was like, "Oh man, yeah, the fighting is insane."
I mean, compared to the choreo that would have been in Power Rangers back in the day, this is a step up.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. We get the final previously on of the season, and it is Magneto's voice. Yeah. And obviously, we know whoever has the previously on is going to have the moment from the episode, and no doubt this was a Magneto episode. The previously on was actually the simplest of any of them, I felt like, because there was no jumping around. It was literally just like, here were the big moments of the last episodes. Like the last two episodes, bam, that's all it was.
Yeah.
Which also makes sense because this is a part 3. So yeah, it would make sense that it would be that somebody was like, they should have just released it as like a mini movie. And I respectfully have to disagree. I think the second you make something a movie, it puts a different level of pressure against the success of it and how many views are expected to it, the marketing that goes behind it. I wanted this as the breakdown of episodes because they literally did the 3-act structure perfectly to me.
Yeah, and also just the show in general. I'm so glad that whoever made a decision at Disney to do this as a weekly release did it, because this show moves so fast that it is most exciting when we have to wait a full 7 days to find out what happens next, and especially with this 3-part finale. Or like there was like 4 seasons worth of stuff happening between these 3 episodes.
The intro itself, there was one new shot added, and that was Xavier and Magneto using their powers in a war zone, presumably the war zone that they're in during this episode. Mm-hmm. So obviously it takes place after the conversation that they had at the bar, which we'll get into in just a second. Just want to point out, during the intro cinematics, we never got, throughout the entire season, Pyro or Avalanche or Mystique, and technically the only ones that we got in the show themselves that were not morph cameos were Magneto and Emma. Everyone else from the villain side was either not featured or a morph transformation.
That's so funny. Mystique is, I think that's the biggest, like, what the fuck? Because, like, was it Nerd Riot that has all the, I don't even know if they're licensed, but they always have, like, timely event shirts for stuff. I'm waiting for them to have a Where Was Mystique shirt for this season, because I think that's the greatest mystery. She's not referenced at all.
I mean, she's referenced. She's not seen, but she's referenced. Yeah. I don't know.
I guess I mean references in her whereabouts.
Like, of course. No, I know what you meant. No, I think it really just came down to, were the characters we needed for the story.
Yeah.
And she wasn't one of them. And based on the way this season went, I fully agree with that perspective on it. Like, I could see why people would want Val Cooper to be Mystique, but it never made sense to me that you would have to do it. Yeah, that's why I stood where I was for the majority of the season. So
yeah, I'm not mad about it, and I don't think they had to do anything. And Val was only ever like a 50-50 depending on the episode for me, and also from a completely uninformed standpoint. It's just so funny because it's like one of the only pillars that wasn't like dealt with from the original show in this one.
That and the Sabretooth Wolverine relationship ish like stuff of like them constantly at war is also not addressed, but I fully agree with you on
although
that.
I guess we kind of saw Sabretooth in the morph thing, but yeah, I get what you mean. The actual Sabretooth wasn't around.
So episode kicks off. Rod, you want to cover the music cue?
Yeah, was it a heartbeat, I think, that introed it?
Oh, sorry. I was referring to
the actual episode. Oh, it was okay. Yeah, it was the birds. Turn, turn, turn.
Right.
Also, a little anecdote from last night. I got to meet 2 music supervisors, or I don't know if there's just 2, but there's 2 of them.
You got to meet 2 of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, congrats on getting all the needle drops this season. You know, there's a lot of actual songs that were outside of the show. And Turn, Turn, Turn was like, I don't know. It sits you in the time period like really perfectly, and also I think everybody's listening to the show that is like in our age bracket. They know the song or are aware of it, but it's lyrically, it's almost verbatim. Was it Ecclesiastes from the Bible? It's a Bible thing.
It's Ecclesiastes,
and it's also so fitting because it's the genesis. We think we're watching the genesis of Xavier and Magneto's relationship, or I guess we kind of are, but kind of aren't. And but like the song addresses that. It's like how time kind of changes, but our goal kind of keeps staying the same, and I don't know, and also that's kind of, what do you call it, like 60s hippie-ish rock or whatever?
So it came out in 1959, which I thought was a great coincidence to One Man's Worth, which also happened in 59, which is before Xavier admitted he had powers. And if you look at where we were from a national perspective, I got the assumption that this was Vietnam. I know other people online are saying it could have been like a war in Europe and stuff like that. For some reason, I just got a little bit of the Vietnam vibe on it, which we were active in Vietnam between 55 and 64. So if it's a couple years after Xavier found out about his powers via One Man's Worth and was using his powers, and he's only just started to look for other mutants, it's kind of like that perfect time frame.
Yeah. It was kind of that era of like peace and love hippie rock kind of. That's where like the birds kind of fall into this. That's why like I was telling Christian and Justine, the music supervisors, which if you happen to come across this, congrats again. Even if you aren't listening to the lyrics, just tonally, like it sounds like, I know you said 59, but it sounds like the 60s. Like it's basically the 60s.
That's when it would have gotten popular into the 60s. So yeah, especially because that's one of those songs that has, I don't necessarily want to call anything timeless because who knows what is timeless anymore, but it at least lasted until we were kids, that we were hearing it on like our parents' radio stations and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, and we talked about this last episode with MT about the Left Behind series.
You and MT got very into that.
So I feel like our generation, even if you weren't in like church or religion, kind of got caught up in this kind of apocalypse fantasy. And a lot of those 60s war songs were part of the soundtrack to that. So we kind of got a resurgence of those songs.
Yep. So we see the inside of a bar, and it's Magneto and Xavier both in their younger years. Magneto basically asks if he's sentimental or suicidal, which, again, we know that the show is TV-14 and not written for children. But there were 2 references to suicide in the dialogue of this.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it in like a triggering way or anything like that, but it was also like, oh yeah, this is 100% written for us. This is no longer, if you had any doubts left after the last episode, even the way the characters speak to each other, it's like, they don't care if a single kid watches this thing. They probably actually don't want them watching it right now.
Yeah. And I mean, even in this scene, it's subtle, but you notice there's actual tanks and not laser tanks going behind them on the windows and stuff, so it's very visceral instead of being sci-fi.
So Xavier is saying, well, if we cared about our lives, why would we be here worrying about survivors? Basically saying like they're putting themselves into harm's way. Magneto cuts off Xavier saying that mutants exist. Xavier starts going into the dream of people would use their powers to make the world better. Magneto's like, nobody wants to be better. They already think they're the best at everything they do. And then you get the interaction of, well, would you care if I was a mutant? And it was kind of like that feeling out where another person stands on a topic. Yeah. And I don't think it was Charles thinking Magneto was anti-mutant. I fully admit, he was probably just like, I want you to say it to me. I don't want me to accuse you of being a mutant.
Yeah, and also coupled with the body language that they animated those two in, it's just really they were like, so are you?
Yeah.
About you? And there's a song by an artist named Fancy Haygood called Either. And this kind of reminds me of that conversation because this song by Fancy, it's about him and a high school friend, how they had a romantic relationship, but throughout their entire relationship, they're like, you're not me neither. But they just keep like sneaking under the bleachers to make out and stuff.
Right.
And it was like, yeah, this is that thing. Because especially Xavier, he's just like, hand under his chin. He's like, so.
he's also a little tipsy too.
Yeah.
And then Xavier's, well, what if I was a mutant? And Magneto's response is run and hide before people start dreaming of camps.
Yeah, it's not his first rodeo.
Yeah. And then Xavier reveals his powers through his telepathy. Magneto reveals his back, and they kind of do the, well, have you met others? And Magneto has not, and Xavier has. So I'm genuinely curious who those might be. You know, from an age perspective, it couldn't have been Shadow King because that would make Storm older than she is in the series. So it couldn't have been that story yet. So I'm curious who else it might be. Maybe we'll get that next season. Xavier's like, yeah, they're alone. They're scared. They're worried they're going to be feared. And then Magneto's like, well, yeah, they're also going to be hated too. Yeah. So at that point, Rogue's voice pops up yelling for Eric, and you see that the outside of the bar and all the other people in the bar have kind of gone away, and now it's just the two of them alone, and water has started to seep up around, and you see this boat that Rogue is apparently sitting on and calling out at that point.
And do we see the other passengers at that point? Or is that
not
later?
yet?
That's
That's later.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's almost like the bar just got dropped into the middle of the ocean. That was the imagery.
Magneto realizes what's going on and calls out Charles point blank of, this is a violation. This is the thing you were never supposed to do.
Fair. Besides making him relive the Holocaust in the original series.
Yeah. Xavier gives the justification of, like, you waged war on mankind, you turned my X-Men against each other, and then what you did to Logan. I want to talk about that middle one in particular.
Turning the X-Men against each other.
Yeah. Of all the things, like, I get the first and the last one.
Yeah.
Because it's like the level of brutality that he did against Logan. Like, if you want to kill somebody, just kill them. Don't do literally the most painful thing possible to them.
Yeah.
So I get those two. But, like, the turning the X-Men against each other, I don't blame Magneto for that personally. Like, he opened the door to me, but I don't think he turned them against each other.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like one of those things where, because it was just Rogue and Sunspot, right? So they were kind of already got a foot out the door at that point, right? Because like you said, like, he didn't force anybody. He was just like, the invitation is open, so you can join me later if you want. Granted, it was a dumb decision by those two.
It wasn't their best moments, yeah.
Yeah, but they were also both very vulnerable. Like, one of them, lost the love of their lives.
And the other got sold out by his family.
Yeah, and Rogue's second choice was still alive and asking for her to join him, so I guess, I don't know.
Yeah. Xavier is like, well, this is our opportunity to restore everything. What's going to happen to all the mutants in a world that is, like, without power? And then Magneto goes dark. He's like, well, evolution thrives in darkness. It's almost like apocalypse territory with survival of the fittest at that point.
Also, this is a good time to bring up, because of the flooding happening outside of this astral plane bar or whatever, or the mind bar or whatever.
Yeah.
Water turns out to be a very important element for the show in general, but this specific episode, and this is a joke between me and my friend Shawnee, who famously should have been on the show a year ago but got sick.
Before we even got to evolution, Shawnee was invited.
Me and her have had this whole thing, or she's introduced to me this whole idea of, like, be like water, like, there's a lot of lessons you can learn from it. Mm-hmm. And then Shang-Chi came out, and, I guess, minor spoiler for Shang-Chi, the resolution is water. And so it's this like ongoing thing through different cultures. And so I just texted her today because she hasn't finished the show. I was like, not spoiling it, but water saved the day again.
So Xavier is essentially saying he will force Magneto to use his power if Magneto won't concede to doing it willingly. Mm-hmm. And they make the mention that this risks shattering both of their minds if that happens. And I got so nervous as that happened, man.
I was gonna say, I could hear you screaming from across town.
Oh, dude. And yeah, I know that some people do love the Onslaught story, but maybe because I read it 10 years after it came out, I just do not have the affinity for it that a lot of other people do. And I was worried that the end of this story was going to be Onslaught. I don't have a problem if something else organically turns into Onslaught, but where like you even mentioned earlier of, you know, this thing is going 150 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Getting Onslaught in this episode would have been too much, you know.
I honestly was worried, even with, you know, being indifferent about the character. I was worried that they were going to introduce that third act big bad and then kill him in 5 minutes.
Right. Xavier's begging Magneto to use reason, and then Magneto goes straight into the comparison with dealing with Nazis. Yeah, I remember when my village used reason when other people were using tanks. That point, Xavier's, I got to do what I got to do. They have a fight in the real world, like the overtake on him, where it's like he's mind blasting him, for lack of a better term. You see Logan is basically nearly naked and just bleeding from all over the place.
Yeah.
And then the yellow pulse comes out when Xavier is overtaking Magneto, and that's where we get into our batch of cameos. So, first one, Silver Samurai in Tokyo. That is Tokyo Tower in specific. That is the white and red Eiffel Tower, essentially, that's in Tokyo. And the lights start to turn on. In Washington, D.C., looks like it's a bunker at the White House. You have Captain America and Iron Man with President Kelly, and the TVs start to click on. New York City, Daredevil is tripping looters. In Manhattan Memorial Hospital, Doctor Strange is doing surgery with his mystic powers via candlelight because, you know, his history as a doctor, he's actually able to still help people who are not in good shape right now. I'd imagine 24 hours without power.
It's so interesting that he went back to being a doctor in this moment, in a moment of crisis, instead of going out, you know, to fight with the Avengers or something. Like this is where I'm most useful.
Yeah. I mean,
which makes sense. Yeah. Because nobody else can do surgery right now.
Right. If like, how many surgeries can you do if you literally don't have things like suction? That's a thing. If somebody starts bleeding out, like you need something beyond what, you know, just a scalpel and stitches are going to be able to give you.
Do you think that was a Christine with him?
I saw that get mentioned online. I don't remember ever reading a comic with Christine.
Okay.
Or watching him in one of the 90s cartoons that would have had her featured in it.
Oh, gotcha.
It's entirely possible. I just don't know enough to say yes or no in either direction.
Gotcha. I guess she just comes top of mind because of how big she was in the strangest storyline in the MCU.
Of course. Yeah, I'm more of, I've seen him with Clea as a relationship, but I do not think that was Clea by any means.
Yeah, so. Yeah. Well, this would make sense too because they might not even be in a relationship. They might just be, you know, co-workers.
Right. Val wakes up in still captivity, it looks like, where Bastion had left her, and you see a bunch of Prime Sentinels. In some of them, it looks like the armor has started to overtake more and more of their bodies, and it actually started to look a little bit like helmets and things of that nature. And then you see Bastion is kind of giving his not his go-home speech, because he does have one more, but it's essentially like, yeah, you were all built to die, which, I mean, technically everything's built to die. And then there is Jean in the lake sinking, and we, you know, like you were alluding to with water and everything like that, it starts to remind me, it's not a one-to-one, but X-Men number 101, the cover where Jean pops out of the water, that's the visual that it invoked for me, with Jean sinking into the water. So
yeah, once you see Jean and, you know, her body's still intact, you're like, okay, so we're getting the Phoenix.
Yeah.
Because also, just what we mentioned last episode, like when Jean dies, we just know now, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And then Sentinels arrive with Forge, Storm, Beast, and Morph. And Rod, I know you were disappointed that your girl still has her guy and you don't have a shot with her, but
with Forge.
Yeah.
Forge, I want to be his buddy. Allison Seeley Smith posted a picture of those two, and she said the Wind Rider and the Maker have arrived. And then I don't know if you saw this, other people start taking that same screenshot and making memes.
No, I did not.
The memes were like, when the cool uncle and auntie show up to Thanksgiving. Yes.
Yeah. I could totally see that. The primes begin launching. Then there was the one part of the storytelling of this season that, like, I actually did not like, where there's mention from Beast that they're all prisoners. I liked the story better when everyone was a volunteer for this, as opposed to what Bo confirmed via Twitter, where certain people like Trish were captives and did not purposefully decide to join the cause.
Yeah, I agree. You sent me that screenshot, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's kind of disappointing, because unless, I mean, I'm not a writer, so I don't know, maybe they can do something cool with the next season. But I did like the idea of, even if it was just a small moment, you know.
Like a moment of weakness scenario.
Yeah. Or just, you know, I don't know if you saw Borat 2, but like he stayed with a couple of like QAnon believers.
Oh, I've seen that scene. Yeah.
Yeah, and Sacha Baron Cohen has gone out to say, like, I just wanted to show that like, these were good people. They were willing to take in a stranger that barely spoke English, or what they thought barely spoke English, but they just went down the wrong rabbit hole, you know?
Yeah. There was something to the power of Sunspot's perspective when he was like, well, what happens when they turn back into people who still wanted to kill us? Like that, there was something about that I just appreciated from a storytelling perspective, but not going to dwell on that, obviously. They point out that Bastion actually believed that his mom begged Xavier to take him, and Xavier was the one who rejected him. And I wonder how much of that is true. Like, only from the perspective of this version of Xavier has crossed lines that 92 and Patrick Stewart's Xavier's did not.
Yeah, and he's been pretty awful. Like, even just the mention of, like, I remember seeing him as a kid, and none of the X-Men were like, wait, what? You've never mentioned this robot child to us?
I mean, and this is roughly around the time where he could have been having those conversations with Magneto. If he saw the kid when the kid was 5 years old, the timeline could have lined up. Who knows? Here was the second mention of suicide from Bastion. He's like, oh yeah, it would have been great. I would have been on your side of peace, tolerance, and equal opportunity suicide.
I guess he's not wrong.
No,
though,
he's not.
Because of Rogue's waiting speech. You know, she's like, how many of us got to die for this point to be made?
Yeah. Storm tries to contradict Bastion, is like, you know, Xavier did come there for you. We didn't ask for any of this either, but you have to let people live. And Bastion's like, did you just try to appeal to my humanity?
Like, have you not seen all the zombie sentinels I just made?
Then he's mentioning, well, because, you know, all this stuff, we have to skip to the final part of my plan. And I know I've said this a billion times. This will be the last time I mention it. He specifically mentions that Cooper has betrayed her kind. If there was anyone who would have been able to detect that Val was a mutant, it would have been Bastion, and would not have said betrayed her kind if she was a mutant. So
I'm happy for you and the other comic book fans that she stuck to character so much that it seemed right to y'all, and her being weird was just because I hadn't seen her before.
Right. And that's the thing, is like the stuff I've read with Val Cooper, she's not likable. Like, I don't like her as a character, but this was her. So
yeah.
And then Bastion is like, yeah, you know, I still have to move into this next thing because people are just too damn good.
That was an interesting speech.
Yeah, because it's like, at the end of the day, there's a chance that humanity will tip back to the right side of history and not try to exterminate mutants, and he doesn't want to risk that.
It kind of goes back, you mentioned like Asimov's law a few episodes ago, or as it remember it, the iRobot thing, that robots realize, wait, to protect humanity, I have to kill humanity.
Not remember it, Bright Eyes, but yes.
Bright Eyes.
It was Bright Eyes because it was trash.
After remember it?
Nope. Yeah. We see Primes pop into the presidential bunker. So Captain America and Iron Man are getting ready to defend. Black Panther is at one of the windows of Wakanda with the Dorma Milaje behind him. That was an awesome shot. Like,
I'm so happy to see the Dora Milaje. They're my favorite.
Well, him slashing through the window and then the Dorma Milaje jumping out onto the Primes and then him following was so freaking cool.
And I guess that also answers our question from, I forget what episode by now, like how Wakanda's doing.
Oh, yeah.
As the rest of the world.
Yeah. Somebody asked, MT asked on that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Which I wouldn't have even thought to ask, candidly.
Yeah.
So, yes, that gets through the barriers of Wakanda, apparently. You see Daredevil is shot through the window of a bodega. Super quick reference, showcasing that it's Hell's Kitchen. It's right next to Josie's Bar. Josie's Bar is the bar that even in the Daredevil show, Foggy and Matt would drink at.
Yeah, yeah. Remember, those were good discussions there. Isn't that where they had their flashbacks in the Netflix show? They would like go drinking and talk about when they were in college.
Yes. Yeah.
I love that.
Yep. And that's where the reveal of the of any characters to appear. The Cloak and Dagger were not on my bingo card.
I was so happy to see that because I know I forget if you said you didn't. I think you said you didn't watch it, but the live action show.
I did not. No.
I thought it was really fun, and I don't know much about them from the comics, even though I had some posters and stuff as a kid because I thought they looked cool.
Yeah. Over in Russia, you see the 1994 Iron Man version of Crimson Dynamo.
Oh, that's who that was.
Yep. Alongside Omega Red and Dark Star. And that's where Bastion's finishing up his speech and drops the whole tolerance is extinction stuff. And then on Genosha, we saw Psylocke, who we've seen before.
Actually Psylocke, though.
Yes, actual Psylocke. You see Puck, North Star, and his sister Aurora, and then Cypher all there. And I was like, wait, why are they in Canada? And then I realized, like, as I was rewatching, I was like, oh, they're in Genosha right now. So he's literally sending primes everywhere to do whatever he needs to basically take everything over. So.
And then that verified that was her at the funeral.
Right.
Because it was the same character.
And there's a weird disconnect on some of the discussions because Bo, I believe, had said it was a character, I'm blanking on their name right now, who was a member of the Thieves Guild. But it was also like, if you compare the screenshots of the girl at the funeral to Aurora, they are literally like the same character design. So it's either somebody was wrong on a tweet or there was a character designer who just didn't put enough difference between the two character models. So
it's been a couple of years. Maybe Bo forgot.
Bastion comes back to Cable and he's asking him, how many times did you try? And Cable resists and Sinister forces him to respond. And you find out that he failed 200 times trying to stop Genosha.
Which is super tragic, but I didn't immediately know if there was any significance to that specific number.
Not that I could find in any of the digging I was doing today. So
yeah, because didn't Bo reference something from Star Trek? And 200 was not a number from that show.
Correct. There's one episode where Kelsey Grammer is actually the pilot of the ship, and they're essentially stuck in a time loop. But as far as I looked up, I didn't see anything around in reference to that show. It's entirely possible it was there, but I wasn't going to rewatch a Next Generation episode of Star Trek.
I'm very familiar with that episode because my dad watched Next Gen, and I remember that episode. They were stuck there for 80 years, so that's why I was like, 200 is not the... Okay, sure.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. The primes arrive, and they literally look like they're going to execute Cable on the beach. Sinister confirms that this is what he wanted and why he was working for Bastion as long as he was, is he literally just wanted Cable as, his own lab experiment to continue on. And then the rumble starts kicking up, the birds start jumping out of the trees, and just see the Phoenix pop up from the lake, and the telekinesis puts the scrambler, starts putting it back together. And that's where I was saying this reminded me of that cover from X-Men 101 slightly, of just Jean popping up out of the water like that.
It's so cool. And we all called it. We were like, we saw the Phoenix too many times in that intro for her not to. And Jean died.
Yep. And then Storm has the weirdest hysterical sounding laugh ever at that moment.
Oh, I get it.
She looked slightly crazy for a half second.
I like that because she's like, haha. Like, I see that when, when you're really cheering on one of your friends and for whatever reason you can't
I don't do that
involved.
For my friends.
Okay.
I boo all of you.
But when you're really cheering on one of your friends and for whatever reason you can't do something about it, like maybe even something like small enough, like I played basketball in high school not because I'm good at it, but because I grew up in Indiana.
Right.
And you're required to. Like, you watch one of your teammates out there and you're like wanting them to, steal the ball or something, and then they do it. And like, that's what it felt like to me. She was like, fuck yeah, like you did it, like.
But she couldn't say fuck yeah, which is why we got the crazy laugh. Telekinetically starts tossing the primes around like they're nothing, and then a giant blue bird claw comes up from the ground and grabs Bastion. And it was just like, it's such a cool visual.
Yeah, and the Phoenix is blue now.
So I've seen blue versions of the Phoenix as well. So that is actually a thing that has happened. Yeah. They put the scrambler on Bastion's head. And then we kind of see a little bit in reverse the order of what's happening with the primes. So in Russia, they shut down. New York City, they shut down. And you see that Daredevil is just like, oh, I'm doing okay. And then a few of them fell from the sky. And that means they're dead, right?
Yeah, we haven't established that yet because a few fell from the EMP. Or not just a few, like millions fell from the EMP.
Yeah, but they're falling from the sky as they're being not Prime Sentinels anymore. So I think they're fucked.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. In DC, you see it as well. And then they pull Bastion underground, essentially. Phoenix picks up Sinister, extracts the DNA rod, make the comment you're going to make about it.
You know what? They made an illustration that you can't even, me or Wally can't make a joke about that being seen. It was literal DNA strands. And
finally, if we get one thing out of X-Men 97, it was the fact that it was seen as DNA strands. Great.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that's how it went in, but that's how it came out. And I didn't expect this part because I've never, look, once again, I don't, keep up with the comics and stuff, so I've never seen depowered Sinister or like devolved Sinister, I guess, essentially.
I mean, it was kind of like all the stuff that was keeping him young and as Gene says, relevant, like pulled out of his body. So he kind of like aged 150 years almost, or 100 years basically instantly.
And it kind of became the comic relief from an anime character, because he was like, oh, it got like really goofy for a second.
Yeah. And then he can't see his reflection in the water, so he goes to Morph, and it's like, show me, because Morph is not going to totally fuck with you right now. Right. And then Morph doesn't. It looks exactly the same to me.
That was another thing. There was a lot of, you probably have notes about this, but a lot of characters seeing their reflections. So
I did not take notes about that.
Okay.
No.
There has to be some significance to like Sinister not being able to accept, because he did see it for a second, right? I remember in the animation, like it popped up in the water for a second, then he turned around to Morph.
Candidly, I don't remember specifically without going back to look at it.
But like the other, like Xavier and Magneto in the water and stuff, like everybody else is like seeing themselves because it's part of a speech later too. So I think it was a really intentional thing to have like a lot of like reflections in water and stuff.
Mm-hmm. So the Phoenix then leaves, and that was a weird twist for me because Bastion's not beat yet.
Right. She's like, listen, I'm just here for Sinister.
Right. And I think this kind of ties into what we're going to talk about at the end of the episode of Jean says, I felt it pulling me back because I was, protecting my son. And obviously there's a whole bunch of stuff with Cable and the Phoenix we'll talk about later in the episode. But it was interesting to hear Jean accepting like being Cable's mom, even though we know it was Maddie who actually birthed Cable. So
I guess I kind of took it as what I said an episode or two ago about like Jean and Madeline have just kind of fused into one person. I mean, when they accepted that they don't have separate memories.
Yeah.
Like, we're essentially the same.
Yeah. And it's all the stuff that Nightcrawler talked about of even if it wasn't your memory, if you know what it felt like for that to happen, isn't it within your kid, basically?
Also, does this imply that the three of them are one, Jean, Madeline, and Phoenix, are like, now they're not separate entities, they're basically just kind of inhabiting the similar space, I guess. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair interpretation of it. Bastion basically like pops out of the ground, goes up, rips Cable's arm off of him, and then it literally felt like a reference to last episode with the Sentinel arm being used to slap a Sentinel in the face, and he literally does a stop hitting yourself with Cable and his own arm. Then he basically merges with the technology of the arm, and I was able to find Bastion with the wings is a reference to the Second Coming storyline that did happen in the late 2000s.
Okay. And, I mentioned, both of us mentioned and joke about like how there's so many anime tropes. This was the moment that Bastion absorbed all of the tropes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's full-fledged anime villain.
Yeah. Also, I didn't get this until a second watch of this episode. Was this trying to, or did this imply that he absorbed like Cable's time cube thing? The computer, because it's in that arm, and maybe that had something to do with some stuff that happens later.
In theory, that I didn't even think about that, Rod. That's yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because if he absorbed the technology, then he would have computer, because Cable's without it right now.
Yeah.
There was the mention of how long it took him to kill all of Genosha, 4,621 seconds, which is just over 77 minutes. So the entirety of the massacre of Genosha was just over an hour and 15 minutes.
Wow, they really condensed that for what we saw. I'm glad we didn't get 77 minutes of that.
Of just pain. All the power goes into him. The neutralizer just literally disappears. Like he absorbed that as well.
Yeah, I guess nobody thought about that before, right? Beast was like, this will neutralize him, but it's also technology.
Yeah. And then that's when the wings sprout out. And he's like, yeah, I'm just going to go cause an extinction level event right now by using the asteroid. And then Cable passes out, understandably, after having his arm ripped off his body.
And he's Jean's son.
She didn't pass out at all this season. I don't want to hear shit. Those are Maddie passing out all the time. That's clone weakness shit.
Was that her?
No, it was definitely some real Jean.
That was Jean at the beginning.
Yep. Everybody up in Asteroid M is in the jet. They have Magneto and Xavier like strapped into seats and they're out cold. In their heads, the conversation is going, and Magneto does not remember who he is at this point. Whatever Charles did shattered his psyche enough that he doesn't know. And that's when you see the water starting to filter in to the bar. And Xavier's like, yeah, you got to trust me. And it's like, does he really have to trust you?
Rogue had mentioned, the Earth's magnetic field came back, and then these two went out like lights. I wonder what's going on. And credit to whoever, I didn't get your name, whoever is standing in front of me dressed as like Phase 1 Magneto from 97.
Okay.
At Scum and Villainy. I like whispered, well, they're fucking in the astral plane. And Magneto, this guy at Scum and Villainy turned around and looked at me and he was like, I like you. We're on the same wavelength.
That's a phrase I never thought I was going to hear.
I mean, we don't know they didn't. They cut away a lot.
Well, thank God I already marked these as not made for kids on fucking YouTube when I do the uploads, Rob. Cyclops goes over to Wolverine, who's next to Jubilee, and he says, don't you break her heart. I was like, is he talking about, like, Jubilee, because she's right there, or Jean?
I took it as Jean because, once again, Cyclops, like, I almost can't accept liking him. Like, he's so cool. Like, and now he's not just cool. In the beginning of the season, he was cool. Now he's actually a leader. And even he's accepting, even if you don't take the romantic thing, is like, you're one of my wife's best friends.
Yeah.
Like, she needs you, and I am looking out for her best interest, and that includes you.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I love it.
And he says, be the best at what you do, heal, which is the play off of what he normally is I'm the best at what I do, and what I do isn't very nice, which is basically him being like, a living weapon. So it was kind of we like you. You're not just a machine of death.
And it was funny because it's super sentimental. And I say that as a guy in my 40s. And I know that if I was still 11, 12 years old, I'd be like, ugh. But what I love is that even Wolverine was like, ugh.
Yeah, there was an exhale right there.
I don't think it was meant to be like rolling your eyes, but it just read funny. It's like, do what you do best, heal.
Jean pops into Cyclops' head, starts to give him the update about Bastion, and then I gotta give credit to our friend Chrissy. They said, oh, look, it's a 3-way call coming in for FaceTime. And that's when Xavier invades the conversation, is like, I have to help Magneto. We need him to save everything right now.
It's like, where the fuck did you come from?
Yeah, Cyclops, not a big fan of this, and is like, yeah, we're risking losing you if that happens. And Xavier's like, okay, cool, bye. And just leaves. Down on the beach, Forge and Beast are inside the Sentinel looking to get one of them operational, which is obviously a callback to episode 1 because you were able to drive a Sentinel just by pulling random levers and such.
I love this callback because anybody that's been listening, like following with us throughout this section, at least, you remember like one of my favorite moments was when Beast mech suited that first Sentinel.
Yeah. And then they kind of start building up Bastion. It's, it's not man or machine anymore. It's literally, we're fighting our own potential future right now. They call him Future Incarnate at that point. Roberto is kind of like giving we know what's going to happen. I only learned how to use my powers 5 minutes ago.
I'm so happy that as the season's gone on, they made the X-Men more and more the audience. I said this last episode because Roberto said what I said before last episode, like, you've had your powers like a day and you chose the bad side.
Yep. And he gives what was essentially like the modern day version of I love you to Jubilee, and she nods.
I thought you were going to say the 16-year-old version of I love you.
That too. Kurt was praying at that point, and Rogue then proceeds to be like, hey, Romeo, the cards are in the favor of the X-Men, obviously doing callbacks to Gambit at that point.
Yeah, also Rogue, I don't know if I would use Romeo as the example because that didn't end too well for him.
Or her.
Yeah.
Didn't even think about that, Rod. Bastion hits out of nowhere into it, goes right to the core of the asteroid, of what's powering everything.
Oh yeah, the gravity core, right?
The gravity core.
Yeah, that kept it in space.
Yeah, so how it was able to operate without Magneto being the one to like physically keep it going and such.
Or I guess, what was it? I think Bo confirmed this upper atmosphere, because something happens later where if they were in space, some people would have died. It's
not there in upper atmosphere yet. It's in orbit, but it's at this point it's not in upper atmosphere yet.
Okay, but it's just not in outer space at any point.
It's not deep space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as he's about to, destroy the gravity core, Rogue comes in out of the edge of the camera and shouts, his name was Gambit, remember it. And I think this actually goes really well with the story we heard from AJ of what are the different ways that the same line could be said by different characters.
Yeah.
And his was the like cocky solace of knowing what is going to happen, where hers was the pain of having lost him.
Yeah.
And it was hard hearing that, man. Like, yeah.
And once again, at last night's viewing, Lenore was there, and it was like watching, star basketball players like highlight reel with them in the audience, and she knocked it out of, no pun intended, she knocked it out of the ballpark with the line. But also, I noticed this more the second time we watched it, that she was crying.
Yeah.
Rogue was crying while throwing a punch, which, man, that's so cool. That's something we wouldn't have seen in 92, because that,
Yeah, she essentially hits him with an anime punch, and it like dislocates like his half of his face with the impact on it. Yeah. And then as they're flying through the rooms of the asteroid, she, to your point, she's crying as she's throwing punches at him, and she is just laying waste to him with these hits, man.
Mm-hmm. I think it does eye pop out at one point or something. He just keeps like reconfiguring himself.
Yeah, they end up going through the side of it, which from a few establishing shots, we knew they were by the moon. They end up landing in the blue area of the moon, where the Phoenix battle happened in season 4. Is that 3 or 4?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, the number order of the episodes not being right at one point totally messes with my head from a timing perspective.
Well, that and the whole perspective of, is this season 6 or season 1?
This is 6.
Yeah.
So they're able to breathe while they're there. That was the good part about the blue area of the moon.
That.
Yeah,
okay.
It has an atmosphere. So,
yeah.
And then my favorite text I got from you in response to anything: did Rogue Hulk clap Bastion?
I was like, I don't know much about the comic book show, but that looked like a Hulk clap to me.
Yeah, that was absolutely a thunderclap, no doubt.
Oh, is that what's called thunderclap?
I believe that's the technical name for it,
Gotcha.
But it's a Hulk clap, no doubt.
Because I've only ever seen Hulk and She-Hulk do it.
Yes.
In the MCU.
Yeah. And then we got a close call. And that was one of the times where I feel like that was when people were yelling. He does start using his teleport abilities, which that, to your point about taking computer and using the technology of Cable, because he wasn't using that before. That only just started during this enhanced fight.
Okay, I didn't put that part together. Yeah, that makes sense.
I wouldn't have put it together if you didn't say the computer part, honestly. Yeah, because that wasn't something he had ever done previously. But he gets Rogue, starts going higher into the atmosphere around the moon. Looks like he's about to take her out, and then full-fledged Sunspot in all his glory fighting with like the planet and the sun behind him. It was like we've seen him at full power, but this was a great moment for him.
And then he gets to say his name.
Yes, this is the first time he's actually said Sunspot.
And I was so happy for Guy, the voice actor for Sunspot, he's there every week. Is coming to villainy. He finally got his moment. I know that before, when he flew, was kind of going to be that, but there was like 700 things that happened in that episode. Yep. Somehow 700 things happened in this episode too, but this was like really, like this was the Superman moment. Yeah, you're here, you've arrived.
Right. You see shots from Earth as all this is going on above, that you could actually see what's going on in space. I noticed Yoshida, which is essentially replacing Sony in what the real life billboard would be.
I didn't think about that.
Yeah, it's like the perfect placement for what would have been the Sony billboard in Times Square in the 90s. So
yeah, Marvel's not going to acknowledge Sony because of what they did to Madam Web and all of the Spider-Man villains.
It's literally just spite.
Yeah, like, this is Sony erasure.
Yeah, a bunch of the world leaders have gotten all their video conferencing stuff working again. And they're all talking, and of all the leaders, the only world leader who actually pushes back is T'Chaka.
Not T'Challa. That was like something a lot of people were upset about. But to me, it made sense because it was the 90s, right?
So if you go by comic canon, T'Challa was the Black Panther well into that point. T'Challa has always been our Black Panther from the Avengers starting, essentially.
Gotcha.
There was a question that was posed to Bo on Twitter, and that was one thing where he said I couldn't speak to why that decision was made.
Yeah, there definitely isn't a clandestine mouse that has anything to do with that.
Yeah, and then Cap backs up T'Chaka, because T'Chaka was basically saying the history books are what we're going to need, because we're not going to be looked at well in history if we do this with the Magneto protocols. Cap says we don't know anything about what's going out or going to happen. This could be more harm than good. And then we got the folder. I love the reference of this folder. This was one of those, yes, everything, I'm pausing this and I'm looking at this and I'm analyzing everything here.
I've seen a bunch of screenshots of this. Also, a little callback, and this is one of the anime tropes that I do know, is that the president had the white glasses, the way that the reflection was working. So in anime, that means they're a villain, right?
I don't know, to be totally honest. So it happened a lot in Evangelion with Shinji's father, who is essentially one of the bad guys. So
I have a lot of weeb friends that, because I don't watch anime myself, but they're like, oh, because there's some cosplayers that have like the glasses that light up like that, and like, oh, it means you're the bad guy,
right?
And so I like that. It was only one shot. It didn't stay, but he looked down, the reflection made his glasses white. It's like, oh, he's gonna choose to fire the missiles.
So the Easter eggs that pop up right here. First, similar to the classic trading cards, there's the power level sets. And there was one power level that did not appear on those classic cards, which was Global Threat.
I was going to say, I don't remember seeing Global Threat.
Global Threat was not in the original power sets. No.
The only thing I would have loved more if it had like colors, and then the beam thing.
Yeah, because it was like strength was always red and stuff like that. Like fighting ability was orange.
Something. I guess that would have been goofy for a government file, so I get it, but it'd have been fun.
I did find somebody did pull some of those original Magneto cards, and they did not line up with the powers from a numbers perspective, though.
I guess that would be tough to reproduce in this show, because you'd have to adhere to some like arbitrary trading card.
And those cards got printed before Omega was a thing.
Yeah.
And the power, like we know he's considered Omega in the show. So if you put like energy projection at a 4, like it was on the card, well, if he's only a 4 with energy projection and he's the master of magnetism, that doesn't make a ton of sense. You know? Yeah. Also, there were the aliases. Did you pick up on the aliases?
That was the stuff I saw in the screenshots.
Yep.
And it's fun little, like, they couldn't say it, but they said it.
Yeah, so you had David, who was the original voice actor who played Magneto in the animated series, who had unfortunately passed away. You had Ian M.
Yeah.
And then Michael F., who are Ian McKellen and Michael Fassbender, who are the live-action versions of Magneto.
I like how they found it necessary to include their last initials. It's like, we would have figured it out.
I don't know, man. People are kind of dumb.
I also noticed that the bottom was one of the kids was redacted.
Right. So you saw Wanda and Pietro, but Polaris, because only the P was visible, her name was redacted.
And I caught that made me pay attention to something in the second viewing about something that happens later.
Right. And then he basically orders the protocols to take place, and we see sad Steve Rogers, who has not had a great show. Let's be totally honest. Like, this has not been Steve's show.
I didn't even think to look. He didn't have a shield with him, did he? I don't think he did.
He might have in the earlier shot when the primes were popping in.
Okay, double check that. But I was like, oh man, did he still, or he either still lost his shield, or he had to have the FBI go, or Secret Service go find it for him.
That's what did happen though. Yeah. Like they were literally people that they were tasked to go do that.
Yeah, or that's why him and T'Chaka are talking, because T'Chaka had to send the Wakandan technology to go find the shield.
Over in the bar, it's continuing to fill up with water, and that is what you were referencing, Rod. Of he's able to see Rogue's face, but also Wanda, Pietro, and Polaris are all kind of hidden in shadows, because at this point his relationship with all of them is fully estranged. Like, he does not have a good relationship with any of them, even based on what happened in the previous episode where he was with Pietro. So
yeah, it's a nice little synergy too, because in the show it's symbolic, but also from a meta level, it's like, we don't want to establish character models yet.
He starts to remember more, mentioning that it was Rogue who left him, mentions that Xavier has left him. Xavier's like, no, we've actually both kind of left each other.
That feeds into the meme of this whole show could be looked at these two making their breakup everyone's problem. Oh, now they acknowledge it at least.
Yeah. Xavier starts to refer to him as his brother. Magneto is not having that. Don't presume that we're family. And then he starts to relive some of the trauma growing up, where he can't remember his parents' faces at this point.
Yeah, and that's an ongoing theme, because a while back, was it Madeline's memories where the faces were missing, and then just a second ago with the boat, with everybody being covered and stuff?
Right. He starts mentioning that the water's too cold. He's going to get pulled under. Xavier says, if you get pulled under, I'm going to get pulled under too, but I will help bring you back up when we surface. And that's where the water begins just like flooding in.
This was a really sweet moment, but also the way they animated it. Xavier was going in for a kiss, right?
Not at this shot, But there is a shot that totally had that vibe.
Even at this point, though, he just keeps inching closer.
Right. The space fight continues. There's a great line from Bastion where it's like, ironic, Xavier's students never learn. I was like, that's such a great dig. That's a great dig.
Yeah.
That should be in a rap battle. That's so good.
It's been 7 years of solid fighting. So.
No, back in Asteroid M, you get a lot of really great team-ups that are going on. Nightcrawler and Scott are teaming up. Jubilee gets involved. Nightcrawler starts teleporting. And I was like, if there's a spot where this could go very, very poorly, it was teleportation. Because at one point, Bastion does figure out what Nightcrawler is doing and is actually able to predict the spot. And I was just waiting for him to put a metal arm right where Nightcrawler, bamfed, basically.
Yeah, there's something to be said about this show proving that they're not afraid to kill off like favorites.
Yeah.
So another person who was at the screening last night was Adrian, who voices Nightcrawler. And I just kept eyeing, looking over. I'm like, are you still employed? What's going on?
Right.
Why are you? Because he's not in LA. He was visiting LA for this. I was like, what? Why are you here? Why'd you make the trip out? Why?
Was this your goodbye?
Yeah. What's going on?
Yep. Scott and Bastion start blasting at each other. And that was 100% a Marvel versus Capcom super reference, right?
So satisfying.
Him just unloading in that perfect way that the beam was structured. That was a Marvel versus Capcom shot.
That takes the entire frame. Yeah.
Tendrils pop out of Bastion's back, and Jubilee ends up saving Scott. And I don't know if you noticed with the animation, she launches it, and it was that spinning attack that she had used in the Mojo fight.
Okay. I was wondering, because it happens so fast. I was like, did Jubilee suddenly get super strong? I was guessing it was like propulsion.
I think it was the whole, we can do this now. That's what I think. I don't know if they did that as full intention of to justify the Motendo episode, but that was her doing something she had never done before in a real life fight.
Yeah, and also with I mentioned last episode with her and Roberto, Roberto, kind of fucking her over. Jubilee got her teeth, and even though she's forgiven him, she kept the lessons from the scorn.
Yeah, the fight continues on. Jubilee gets her glasses actually broken, and then I'm like, are they going to take out Jubilee here? What the fuck, guys?
Oh, see, I didn't think they were going to kill her. I guess that makes sense, though, looking back. When they broke her glasses, I was like, now you crossed the line, because those are probably, limited or something.
Yeah, and she gets full on in his face, throws him against the throne that Magneto had built, and then a Sentinel head just lands on top of him. And I think this is the spot that you were talking about, Rod, where as he gets the head off of him, his face is all messed up and his eyeballs are hanging out and everything like that. So
yeah, well, there's just so many times where it would have been any other character in the show, including the most powerful ones, would have been liquefied, and he just keeps reconstituting. He's like Terminator.
He's like Nimrod.
Yeah. Oh yeah. More. But Nimrod's like Terminator, right?
Yes. Yep. And then he's like, see, one of my children is here, or something to that effect. And a Sentinel comes in and just lands foot first onto Bastion.
That's my kind of humor. I laugh both alone and watching with the crew and stuff, and I was like, I love it. And then that chest plate pops off. Yeah, it's a team.
Yep. Yeah. Jean, Storm, Morph, and Beast. And like I said, I've loved where they address stuff for the audience without anybody needing to ask. They're like, oh yeah, Forge is back there with Cable. He's okay, kind of thing.
Yeah. Storm said it because she phrased it weird. She's like, he lives. I'm like, okay.
And then Beast obviously is referencing the Trojan War because he's like, oh, those Greeks, they love their horses and their irony.
Which implies that Beast could hear Bastion's monologue.
Right.
Beast stays in the Sentinel. Everybody else jumps out. But when you think about everybody is there, Storm and Jean can fly down. Morph can't. But this was super, to credit to the animation and stuff, it was super smooth. Morph casually, without any announcement, just turns into Sauron for half a second.
Just to go down 15, 20 feet.
It's just the team who was producing this episode is who haven't we used yet? Okay, who can fly? Throw that in.
We did get the Sauron cameo in the 8-bit version in Motendo, but we didn't get full-on version of him. Also, I know not everybody loves Funko Pops, but I will say the 8-bit Sauron would go really well with your 8-bit Jubilee, Rod. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have that up here. Little side note. Someone much younger than me said something to the effect millennials make fun of their boomer parents for collecting precious moments, but isn't that what you guys do with Funkos? And I'm like, you're not wrong. I don't personally like Funkos, but you're not wrong. Yeah. Not every boomer like precious moments, but enough.
I would say from a average percentage, more of us own Funkos than they owned Precious Moments. So we might be worse.
Yeah, there wasn't an entire factory on Hollywood Boulevard of Precious Moments, and there is one of the Funko Pops. So
it's a little bit closer to Gen X being the age group that was collecting Beanie Babies.
Oh yeah. Because the Funko Pops are supposedly going to have a little bit of value, right?
No, not at this point.
I feel like this is going to be like a real letdown.
No, I need to sell a bunch of them. If anybody wants to buy the full set of Game of Thrones Pops, let me know. So Bastion is continually trying to push the leg up and not get crushed by it. Everybody is readying up, essentially, and Scott says to stand down. And that's when I thought Scott lost his fucking mind.
I kind of got it, though, because they did this long shot of Scott looking from side to side, seeing everybody powering up, you know? And you just knew they were going to die. Even though everybody got to the highest level they could, like Storm is a goddess now, Jubilee has teeth, maybe not Sunspot, Rogue is pissed off.
He's just trying to survive at this point.
Yeah. He saw the thing that, like, I love. It wasn't surprising, but it was unexpected.
Yeah.
I love that. It was like
you get the logic of it. It's not a bad, uncharacteristic choice.
Yeah, I was like, I get it. He's like, this is really hypocritical. We've been telling humanity to not fight us, and we're fighting this next, future versions of us. This doesn't make any sense. We might die from this, but we can't not live by our own standards.
Right. And then I feel like there was maybe a line that was cut for time because Scott just jumps into like your mom lied to you kind of scenario. So I was like, wait, did Gene give him like a psychic update that conversation had happened or something?
Sure, let's say that. Or it was a wizard.
Yeah, it was always a wizard. And Bastion is obviously defensive, and Cyclops is like, parents mess up. They mess up all the time. I've messed up as a parent. They're just humans.
Granted, Cyclops' parental mess ups were far more recent than anybody else's, but
yeah. I mean, he gave his baby to a random guy that he's only kind of known for a few months, and that guy dropped the baby in the time stream. So Bastion is still standing by. Humanity's going extinct. And then Jean is like, no, they're having babies like us.
All of us laughed at that.
It's hard not to. The alarm sounds off. Missiles are headed towards the asteroid. And Scott exactly knows that it's the Magneto protocols that are on their way to hit. Jean creates a bubble. And then these are some advanced ass drones because they literally know how to target right into the gravity core.
Yeah, I guess that's why it's called the Magneto protocols, because otherwise they're just nukes.
Right, because it felt like they didn't want to just nuke it. I think they were like, they needed to know how to hit the particular spots of this. So.
Yeah, but also you could tell it was definitely like a UN thing because it was so half-baked. What was the plan of knocking a thing out of the sky that's still within orbit?
Yeah. Something of that multiple mile scale, right? They extend a hand to Bastion. Bastion doesn't want to take it. And then Bastion starts flying toward what looks to be a bigger exploding core. That starts to go off. And then Kelly is watching as all this is happening too. And then the asteroid starts falling towards the Earth. Exactly what Steve said would happen. Kind of like, we probably shouldn't just do this willy-nilly, right?
Yeah, and then did you get the impression that the news report that was playing to the public was like framing it as the X-Men's fault?
I think it was more so like we're fucked was the gist of it. So
they were just like, yeah, well, the Magneto protocols didn't work out. It's like they didn't work out, or it made them worse.
Yeah. Did humanity mess up something? Never. Yeah. We would never do that. The vacuum of space starts popping out, and Morph turns themselves into Mr. Fantastic to be able to grab onto something to keep themselves from getting sucked out. Jubilee does not have that power, so she gets sucked out into like space. But I think to what you were referencing earlier of being an upper atmosphere where it's it's not going to instantly kill you kind of scenario, that's where that was, where I think they had already started descending at that point.
Yeah, and also
because there was also distance between. They were a lot closer to the moon a few minutes ago.
Yeah, too. And at this point you could see it from like Times Square or something, but like
I think the scale might have been a little messed up, honestly.
Not as a dot, off it. So it was like pretty close. So, and it's a cartoon, so it's fine.
Yep. And then Sunspot flies out, grabs her, mentions that he has Jubilee, and they're like, all right, cool, get her to Forge. Don't try to come back because you can't do anything up here, basically.
Yeah. That had to have been also a decision of let's not kill children in the show. I guess she's not a kid anymore, but
they're 18. Yeah,
yeah,
it's fine. They start saying, are there ways to keep this thing in orbit? And Beast is kind of like going through everything in his mind of like, well, if I do this and I had this and I had a little more time, and Cyclops is like, just get on the jet. I'm just going to blow this thing up from the inside. He's essentially pulling, what was it, Armageddon? Like, he's like, I will blow up the asteroid from the inside.
Yeah. And then Jean's like, no, you'll die.
He's like, you've done it.
Yeah, but I was waiting for her to be like, I also had like cosmic force inside of me. You recently found out that you loved your son. So I'm not sure if that's equal.
Right. Rogue jumps in, is saying, well, Gambit died so all of us could live together. And they're like, all right, well, if we do this in unison, it's still a long shot. So fuck it, let's go. Down on the Galapagos. So that's where it was, right? It was the Galapagos Islands was Bastion's spot.
Something like that. I've lost track of geography on Earth by this point. We've hopped so many different places.
Val and Forge are on land, and Storm is essentially through a busted comm giving them the update of what's going on. And they're like, well, how are you guys going to escape? And then the communication goes out at that point.
Yeah, Forge is like, no, you'll die.
And then it's just like garble, garble, garble.
Yeah, Val's just sitting on the back, and she's like, I'm just going to sulk back into the shadows now.
This is awkward. Yeah. Cable is sitting inside the diner with half of his body wrapped, which now no longer has an arm on one side.
This moment made me question how far he'd gotten in his 200 times.
How so?
Because he seemed really comfortable there. And I know he's done a lot of time traveling. I'm not saying he made it this far, but it got my mind thinking, did he necessarily only get as far as like Genosha every time? Did he get a little bit further before? And then I don't know. Like
I am convinced he always got sucked back right at the last second. With the interaction he had with Maddie was when is the furthest he's made it. That gotcha. I'm very convinced of that.
And Cable is just like you said, he's just chilling in the diner during Armageddon.
Well, he can't do anything at that point. He's just probably using his telekinesis to prevent his body from spilling out into the side of the diner. And then we get astral projections of Cyclops and Jean, and Cyclops is saying, I promise not to do what I've already done once to you, which is what my dad did to me, which is leave without saying goodbye. And I think this is like Cable being the soldier kind of scenarios. Like, got it. It's going to be one of those moments, right?
That was the line that made me one of those, like, how many options of this have you heard?
I think it was just because he's been on enough missions, like, as a soldier, that, like, he knows there are some missions you just don't come back from. And he read that that's what this was going to be for them.
And this is credit to Bo, Charlie, and the other writers. I'm sorry, I forgot your names. This could have easily been a really cheesy speech.
Yeah.
It was so good, especially Cyclops.
Well, and I love the foreshadowing that happens here is, the rebel leaders, they would always tell the stories about the X-Men to get everybody excited. And I was so pissed off because I should have been in those stories too. It
fits Cable's character, but I was still surprised to hear that because I was like, oh, that's why he just kept coming back. We used to say in 92, like, why did people keep coming back? It's because he was trying to fix things, but he also wanted to be part of the thing that he felt like he was like robbed of.
Right. To be a part of those narratives that are inspiring people throughout history. And they're like, well, gotta get going, but just wanted to let you see what your mom said, which is that you have my eyes. And it was just like a really great shot of him taking the visor off with Jean allowing it. And you see Cyclops with the brown eyes, and then you get this great shot of Cable as well. So
and also kind of gives a credence to when Jean was like retelling that story verbatim about or Jean and Scott telling the story verbatim of the visor stuff from last time they did it. And he said, these are your eyes now. Oh man, that shouldn't have been a good line.
No, it shouldn't. If you read that on paper, that should not be a good line.
So good. Yeah.
It says, I love you, son. They leave the psychic projection back up in Asteroid M. Scott is effectively powering the power station, which is now apparently all fucked up from those missiles going in there. And it's basically fueling the thrusters to help slow their descent is what he's going for. We see Rogue, Storm, and Jean all go outside and are using their various strength, telekinesis, and control of the atmosphere to decrease the speed as well.
It's kind of like the mutant equivalent of like when your car breaks down, you and your friends all do your best to try to push it uphill.
Yeah. Down in New York, the radio is going. It was in particular set to 1966-06.
That's a comic book. number reference, right?
I saw online floating around that if you look at the date that, I hate saying this out loud, the date that Onslaught first appeared, it was the June of 96 X-Men comic.
Oh, so it wasn't the actual number, but it was the date. Okay.
No, because for the most part, next to no comics have gone over 1,000 issues. The number of series that have gone over 1,000 issues of main Marvel books or DC books, you could count on a single hand right now. Yeah. And that's where we get the other great cameo of the episode. Peter and MJ are watching the broadcast through broken glass in front of Crazy Eddie's or whatever that TV store was.
Is this a little nudge to they're going to continue Spider-Man now too? Because I did rewatch Spider-Man pretty recently. Like, yeah. I say recently, it's like a year, like in 2019, like right before the pandemic. And I distinctly remember
5 years ago, Rod.
It's funny because it is like pandemic times made it like longer and shorter. Yeah. Time-wise somehow. But I do remember like the two big things from the finale were Spider-Man meets Stan Lee and loses MJ. Right. And then we left on that cliffhanger, but he's standing there with MJ. And I think that's Flash Thompson there too, right?
It is Flash. I did a comparison because I was like, oh, is that an Eddie Brock or a Flash Thompson? Mm-hmm. Definitely color scheme and the Eastern State University jacket. It's definitely Flash. So
I just wonder if there's a story to tell there now of Spider-Man finding MJ, or if they're just gonna, no, it's happened, now it's fine.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like if we don't get an announcement, let's say 2 weeks from today, then I think it's just kind of like a, hey, we helped wrap up this story and gave them a moment of getting back to each other scenario.
Or either Bo or Charlie or one of the other writers was like, let's give a leg up to the possibility of the next team doing Spider-Man.
Yep. You see, Beast is essentially trying to steer and prevent this from heading right into Manhattan, which is like the worst spot this could have fucking landed. And then you get the moment where Logan is with Morph, and I didn't pick up on it without seeing the captions. Logan says Jean.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did notice that because I watch captions.
Yeah. And then Morph says, I can't say it to you, but they can. Turns into Jean and says, I love you, stay with me.
I cheered both at home and with the group, and luckily we were with a group that also cheered for that. I know that was like a kind of a controversial point online. I don't know why. Well, because however you decide to take it, it's not a problem.
Well, there were certain posts that went up where it was saying that there were not romantic feelings between Morph and Logan, and then there were other ones that were saying from official sources. So like the official sources have actually like sort of contradicted each other on this one, so I think that's where the debate comes from. Okay. But it was kind of like Morph had potentially an unrequited love with Logan, and they couldn't say it as Morph, but they could say it as Jean.
I mean, that's what I mean, though, is I think it's one of those things where it doesn't change the overall story one way or the other, and so either way that are the main ways that people are interpreting it is fine.
Yeah.
And to me, the unrequited love makes sense. It's not saying that Logan, there's a little definition of the unrequited part. Logan may not have those feelings, but Morph does, and that's fine. It's not, people have done much worse in this show to each other than, confess their love.
Then reject a love confession. Yeah. I mean, Logan in the first season literally confesses his love to Jean, and it's not given back to him. So, and then they make out in front of him 20 minutes later. But it's also could be seen as well as this is a motivation for Logan from Morph to pull through as well. So
I would love for there to be like Logan being halfway there. I mean, because to me, I personally don't care where they take Logan as far as his like identity or whatever and stuff. But it would be really cool if like Logan was like, listen, that's not me, but if it were, it would be you.
Right.
Or Logan's like, yeah, me too. Remember that shower scene?
the hard to reach places?
Yeah. It's like, we did that last Tuesday. We can do it for reals now,
Yeah. Forge, Val, Sunspot, and Jubilee are on the ground, and Forge is realizing that they've hit terminal velocity. Beast is dealing with the systems, which are just like all shutting down and losing their shit. Nightcrawler is finishing an Our Father while holding his rosary beads, and he's just praying along because what else is he going to do at this point?
Yeah. Well, I was half expecting for Cyclops to be like, and now Nightcrawler is going to teleport Asteroid M into the
sun.
Yeah, because they so casually mentioned and didn't show it back in the last episode.
Back inside Magneto's head, the argument is kind of like, nobody's going to understand me. There's nobody like me. People that resemble him. And Xavier is like, the X-Men and I don't look at all like each other. We don't resemble each other even in the way that we act, but we are still a family. And then this is the part where I think it felt like it, where they start getting incredibly close to each other.
The eye contact.
And there's total eye contact and the water's raising, so they're getting closer to each other. And it's like, we had a dream, and that dream made us a family. And if a dream is powerful enough to make you a family, it's powerful enough to be worth fighting for. And then he's been calling him Magnus this entire time. He's not actually called him Magneto. And he's like, remember, you chose another name, and he was going to be remarkable at whatever he did. Who is he? Say the name, essentially.
There were two things about this moment. I texted you. So they did a reverse Titanic. Now, I've never seen Titanic, but I know this scene.
Right.
I love that there was a tiny bar table, and 2 adult men could fit on that.
And hold on to it.
But also, this had to have been a direct commentary to the meta conversation of, is representation important? Because both of them are like, yes, it is definitely important.
Yeah. At that point, he pops up through the bubble out the top of the Blackbird. So that roof is fucked now. So that's what, the 5th Blackbird they've destroyed?
Sure. Beast is like, whatever.
Yeah, I don't care anymore. And then he yells, Magneto lives, which, was that what he yelled in the video game back in the day? In the Konami game?
I don't remember, but the pose was the same.
Yeah.
His chest is like all about to burst out of that armor. Also, questions about that stab wound.
It moved to the side. It's fine.
Sure. It migrated.
No, and I did text this to you. There's a part in the comics where he literally keeps himself alive for a few minutes after his heart has been removed from his body.
Yeah.
So if 3 stab wounds by comparison, fine.
Sure. I guess they're nice and clean because those claws are very sharp.
He rebuilt his blood vessels using iron. That's how that works, right?
There you go. I know you didn't watch Last Airbender, but there's the bloodbender. So he did something like that.
I have heard the stuff about the bloodbending stuff, and that shit is dark.
Yeah. That's in very later seasons.
Yeah. So they are over New York City, and they're getting to the point where you can clearly start to see buildings and stuff like that, and essentially stops the descent, starts to raise it back up into the sky. Rogue, Storm, Jean go back in. Everybody is celebrating in Times Square as they're watching it. It gets back up into orbit, and then all of a sudden there's a massive blue blast. And I was not expecting that to be how this episode was going to end, really.
No. So once again, to the writers, good job with the surprises. Because that was all like it was so quiet. It was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, because it wasn't an explosion. It was something that had a very specific aesthetic to it. And we didn't know at the time what that was. All we see is Forge is holding a comm. That's what he was talking to Storm with. And it just said no signal on it. So that means it's either completely gone or destroyed or somewhere else, essentially. So kicks over and you find out it's been 6 months since E-Day. So I did some digging. I couldn't find E-Day as a reference in the comics, though.
Okay, I just assumed Extinction because of the asteroid.
Because it could have been an Extinction level event. Yeah.
And also, did you get... I took it as the public received the X-Men in general as heroes because of the memorials in front of the mansion.
At least some of them, absolutely.
Yeah.
You're in the ruins of the mansion. There's a board in the lab that has a breakdown of a bunch of other mutants. So
that they specifically animated for Eric Voss and New Rockstars. It just feels like they're making stuff for YouTube channels now.
Yeah. So obviously it also had a reference to Days of Future Past with what we talked about during the Motendo episode as well. But here were the breakdown of all the characters and what their statuses were. Jubilee, Sunspot, and Cable all marked as AWOL.
That's what that said. I couldn't figure out what that said because it was shorter than the presumed dead.
Yeah, it was basically don't know where they are. They fucked off. You had specifically the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who were marked as off-world.
World, yeah.
You had the big list: Cyclops, Jean, Storm, Beast, Magneto, Nightcrawler, Xavier, Morph, Rogue, Wolverine, and Angel, which is the shocking one of the group, all marked as missing and presumed dead. The last spot we saw Angel would have been during the gala on Genosha.
Yeah, so like, what?
I don't know. That, and then just completely uncovered, you had Colossus, Dust, Magic, Iceman, Havoc, Exodus, Emma Frost, and then the one that the internet is probably the most excited about, Shadowcat, Kitty Pryde.
Yeah, I am not at all familiar with Dust, I don't think, unless I've seen them in a different thing that I didn't recognize them as.
The only thing you would have seen Dust in is in the trailer in that first episode we were talking about the Hellfire Gala newspaper clipping.
Yeah.
Dust was the mutant who's fully covered from having a Middle Eastern descent.
Okay, yeah, I guess but before that, I don't think I even had any exposure that I know of to that character. Exodus surviving Genosha. Interesting. I'm not familiar with Exodus. I heard later that their powers are like really crazy, godlike stuff.
Their power is based on the level of belief. So they have stories that go back to literally Jesus of Nazareth type stuff.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so they are a Omega level.
So, and I think back when Remember It Happened, that was one of the things I saw. That's why I looked up stuff about Exodus. I saw a lot of people on the message boards and stuff being upset. Like, how'd they fucking kill Exodus? I was like...
And I also saw people who were pissed of like, why isn't Exodus fighting kind of scenario too?
Well, I mean, they were one of the first to get zapped, and maybe, you know.
Oh no! I mean, they didn't zap, so yeah.
Well, I mean, like, get zapped by like a sentinel or something.
Right. If it was out of nowhere, yeah. There was specifically on the radio. It was talking about how Graydon Creed was pulling ahead in the polls. So obviously, Friends of Humanity is taking some sort of political perspective, and that President Kelly was under fire because of how extremists were waiting for the second coming of Magneto in San Marco, which is a fictional place that appeared originally in X-Men number 4 in the 60s.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that storyline.
It was the first appearance of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, basically.
Oh, okay. Oh, so he might have his own following when he comes back?
That's kind of what's implied of kind of like all the people who are like, Magneto was right, and he's coming back. Think about the acolytes from the original Sanctuary episodes and such.
Gotcha. We should just stop idolizing people. This is a lesson that both in real life and the cartoon people need.
It goes pretty badly whenever we do. Yeah. Bishop comes in with a howdy, which was perfect because like to the whole like cowboy vibe and everything like that. And at this point, Forge doesn't know who he is. He wasn't on the team when Bishop was around. And obviously Storm wasn't really giving him details about like other dudes on the team, apparently.
Yeah.
Bishop is like, yeah, you know, we're friends, just not yet. And points out that Forge is putting together a list of mutants to help carry on the torch. Don't you think it's a little soon for that? Forge is like, dude, I searched for months and I couldn't find them. They're gone, or they're dead, specifically. And Bishop basically goes to, well, this isn't the first time we've had the game of, oh, the X-Men are dead. They got pulled. And it's not a matter of where they are. It's a matter of when they are. And somebody pulled them through time, and we need to be the ones to rescue them.
Such a great setup for the next season. Also, I love that we had Isaac on the show, and he knew how the show ended.
Yep, so good.
That's like when I met Iman Vellani at an awards show a couple years ago, and this was a year before the Marvels came out. It's like, you know, the next phase is ending. He's like, yep, you're like the youngest member of the MCU, and you've been tasked with the secret for 2 years.
They basically just gave her the most intense PR training after Tom Holland failed repeatedly.
Right. I also noticed in some of her interviews with various YouTube channels and stuff, they acknowledged there was always an off-camera Marvel rep.
Because of Tom Holland, probably.
Yeah.
Rogue wakes up in Egypt 3000 BC. And, you know, anything about the X-Men, you know that Egypt and Apocalypse go together. You see these men in snake masks who are attacking villagers. It looks like, I looked up the Egyptian snake god, which is Nehebkau, I think is how you say it. Probably saying it wrong, but that's the best I could find for it. Because I was like, oh, is that like a Horus thing? And it's like, no, that's a specific deity within Egyptian lore. Nightcrawler comes in for the save, and we start cutting back between these two eras. Let's just stick to the Egypt one before we go into the future one. You also don't see them there, but it was acknowledged online that Storm, Morph, and Logan are in this timeline too of the 3000 BC.
I like how Bo revealed that too.
I felt like it needed it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, though the way that Bo acknowledged it was the Marvel No Prize,
which is an old school reference because even by the time I was picking up comics, I don't think No Prize was a thing.
And I only know about it because of our mutual friend Scott Nicewander, because he would do the no prizes on NerdSync, and then I learned that was from the Marvel thing.
Yep. So you see Apocalypse is fighting some of these snake guys. Beast is revealed carrying Xavier over. Magneto comes up and literally grabs these dudes because they're wearing all metal and tosses them into the sky. Xavier basically acts as a psychic connection so they could speak with him, and they ask him who his name is, and it's En Sabanur, which is Apocalypse. Any comic reader would know that. And I was like, would Xavier and that team know the name too? Obviously the face and the markings are Apocalypse, but it's like, is he Apocalypse yet?
I love that that's how they decided to do that reveal, because it doesn't make the assumption that ancient Egyptians knew English. It was really clever.
Like a lot of time travel movies where everybody can instantly speak to each other.
Yeah. And also I texted you this. I was like, we got to see like young hot Apocalypse. Abs for days.
They start to head towards, and you see this giant dome in the desert, and Beast gives an oh dear, which is actually the last thing that happens before the credits cut in, but trying to keep the two stories smooth.
I love that Beast has been here more for the comedic one-liners than actual science.
Yeah. The other side of the time travel stuff, you see Jean and Scott land in 3960 AD, and then you see people in these robes who are members of Clan Ascani popping up. You find out that their leader is a woman named Mother Ascani, who is Rachel Gray.
Okay, I was wondering about that because you told me before that Rachel was the one with the lines on her face, and there was another. I didn't know if they were just like related or something. And this character also had the lines on her face.
So this is Rachel Gray, which is a daughter of Cyclops and Jean from an alternate reality.
And then they have a reveal of young Nathan.
Yep.
And it's so sweet. Jean recognizes Nathan from his eyes. And so does that mean that that's the rebels that Cable was referring to?
Yeah, this is essentially like his people who were raising him. So he also says, I don't think we need to be scared of them.
Now that I'm thinking about it, this kind of maybe explains what I mentioned before. I wondered how many times Cable had been through this loop or whatever, because he seems so comfortable or everything. It makes sense that he would be comfortable when his arm was gone and everything. He's in the diner because he already remembers seeing his parents when he was a child. This is not the first time that I'm seeing them. It's the first time they're seeing me, but
Yeah, I mean, he's known who Jean and Cyclops were for a long time, and I think he never wanted to reveal it to them in the modern timeline because he doesn't want to fuck up his future.
It would screw up the loop or whatever.
Back to the Future rules, basically. Yeah, and so we get the very first to be continued that we ever see in this season, and I knew there was going to be something, and I let it go through the rotation, and then it goes to present day Genosha before the just text credits pop up, and the captions do spoil it for you just in case you don't know. It says Apocalypse is the one who says it, and he says, so much pain, my children, and you see he's picking up a card, which is that burned Queen of Hearts card, and then so much, and it goes to emphasize his face, so much death. And that is how we end the first season of X-Men 97.
Which is somehow, it was both everyone, like so many people's predictions of how it would end,
right,
but also still really satisfying.
Right, like you even shot me a message. You were like, oh, the team split up, but not how you thought it was going to go.
Yeah. It's so cool. That's why I texted you. I was like, oh, if we see AJ again, we'd be like, congrats on keeping your job.
Yeah. It's, this will be interesting. And I mean, I don't know if, Rod, you've had it spoiled for you what it looks like when Gambit is one of the Horsemen.
I've only seen a couple of shots, and they all look vaguely the same. He has a skeleton head or face or whatever. It's
a little more like very dark. Yeah, like just like he literally looks like the epitome of death. Honestly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So
that'll be wild. More trauma for Rogue.
Yep. Yeah,
but like we said at the beginning, like somehow resolved for all of us watching, but so unresolved and cliffhangery for the actual characters, which is like really great writing.
I mean, that's the drama, is that their story is not done. And I don't know what the timeline was of when they found out they were getting the second season, like how far along they were in the animation process and stuff like that. Was this last 10 minutes an add-on, and that's why it was a 40-minute episode kind of scenario? I'm genuinely curious about that, because we do know that as of Comic-Con this past summer, which, God, that's almost 10 months ago at this point.
Yep.
The writing on season 2 had mostly been concluded towards that point. So they had time, obviously, for season 2, but I just genuinely am curious, was it the same as what happened at the end of season 1, where the Mr. Sinister stuff got added essentially at the last minute when they found out they were getting renewed into another season?
Well, some traditions outside in the meta get carried on.
It feels like they had somewhat more notice, though, because obviously if you didn't know you were getting that next season, you wouldn't have had them do the blip to disappear into the other timeline. You know, you would have had some more clean resolution. So
yeah, but man, such a, like you had commented on one of my posts about last night's event. We waited so long, and we were just kind of afraid of starting this podcast and being like, what if it's bad?
Yeah.
But it was like,
oh, that was the Insta for the show's Instagram. That was where I put it in there.
Oh, okay, yeah. And it's probably the closest to objectively good as you can get without having Michelle Yeoh be a voice. I'm just dropping hints to any writers or decision makers. And I don't know, yeah. And they stuck the landing somehow, even though there's so many things that sound like they shouldn't have worked. Like how fast this last episode went. I mean,
it was a lot, dude.
Yeah. I hear people's complaints, some minor complaints about like how fast paced it was. And it's like, I agree with you, it was fast. But I think they made it work. Yeah. It didn't feel like they skipped stuff. It just felt fast.
I agree with that. I would say, honestly, the only thing that felt too fast of the entire season was the Inferno episodes. For me, I wish that had been 2 episodes instead of a single one, because Inferno as a concept is so cool and big. I would have wanted to watch more of it. You know,
it kind of turned out to be like a fun house.
Yeah, but yeah, man, it's hard to believe we're already done with the first season of the show, and the hard part is not knowing when the second season is coming. Like, we know it's coming, and we're obviously like absurdly grateful for that, but just like, we don't know even what the release date is for this one. And I don't know anybody who is, I can't wait for season 2 of What If, that are gonna like mark a calendar for it and stuff like that. Like, people are excited when they get the date, but nobody's like chomping at the bit for more of that by comparison to this.
I guess the little glimmer of hope that we have is that as of recording, there was a recent event where 3 Marvel projects got announced with dates, or a couple dates and a couple like relative like time frames or whatever. Yeah,
the Marvel TV at the New Fronts, where they confirmed Ironheart, Daredevil, and Agatha. Yeah, God, I just missed all of those as we were saying. It's been a long recording. Yeah, man, I kind of want to take a beat and think about it and let it all digest. And we've been talking about a few collaborations with other creators in the X-Men sphere, of talking about the season in totality and stuff like that. Like, right now I'm just still kind of riding high on how good it was. And, you know, there are a million debates that we can have going forward of who was the character of the season, what was the best story moment, and all that kind of stuff. I just kind of want to enjoy, like, we got something so damn good.
Yeah. And I actually kind of like that, at least to me, there wasn't necessarily a character of the season. It felt like a team series.
Yeah.
Just great. As far as like a kind of a initial, reaction.
Right.
Everybody felt like they did things they needed to do. Except we still don't know where the fuck Mystique is. But that's fine. I'm not mad about it. It's just weird.
She's hanging out with Avalanche and Pyro, obviously.
Let's just put this in the recording now. It would be hilarious if the next season starts with Mystique, Avalanche, and Pyro camping out in the woods somewhere, just surviving.
They're just hiding.
Well, because we got that with Creed and Trask last series, Oh,
yeah, they were in the rainforest or something.
Yeah, because they're the main 3 that were missing that were such a big... They're both in the intro and a big part of the last series. And then maybe there's another storyline that happens there, but it's just them like all driving each other crazy because they hate each other, but they have to like kind of hide out together.
I think Pyro and Avalanche are probably cool with Mystique, but I think Mystique is not cool with Pyro and Avalanche.
But maybe that's what's funny, is that she has to be.
It's like a Three's Company scenario, but she just hates her 2 roommates.
Or like an Odd Couple kind of thing or something. It's just, I don't know. It should be funny. And what's funny is it's already in writing somewhere. We just none of us know what it is.
Yeah. Somebody knows where those characters are. We don't. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. Bo said this at one of the Scum and Villainy viewings, that he wrote a Bible for this show. So even if the actual story isn't written, the concept of whatever happened to most And I feel like Mystique at least is important enough of a character that her whole outline is in there somewhere.
If we're not misremembering the quote, which was that he basically had 5 seasons of content outlined, he can't go through 5 seasons of X-Men and not have Mystique appear in it. Like, let's even assume it's a toned down version of Mystique because maybe he hated the Jennifer Lawrence version or whatever. Yeah. But Mystique is such an important character to the comics. You cannot not have her.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I have to, for anybody that's, isn't in LA or not familiar, when the show Bible is not necessarily a script, but it kind of like sets rules for the writers and stuff about like how to write for the show.
It will also be like, oh, don't do this during season 1 because this main character reveal happens in season 3 type stuff. Like, so it prevents you from spoiling moments and then having to go back and rewrite stuff.
Yeah, and it's supposed to give like tone to different characters and motivations and stuff. So it has to be. She has to be in there somewhere. Maybe Pyro and Avalanche got written off, but I don't know. Mystique
they're still in the intro though.
What if the show Bible is just like Pyro and Avalanche dash intro? That's the whole section.
So we have one more regular week of X-Men 97 content. Next week, we are going to be doing the Disney Plus Assembled episode about this. I have no idea what that format is going to be for how we talk about it, but did want to let people know that that is still coming next week. And then we may have a little bit of a hiatus after that. We're not sure the exact timing and for how long, but this was just a lot of content and we got through all of it. But we need to breathe before we get back into X-Men Evolution. And then obviously we have various people from the show that we've become friendly with over the previous 2 months that we are excited to have on. But scheduling is a bitch in LA. So
yeah, and this kind of times out too because we've historically taken breaks over like the June, July months because of like
strikes,
VidCon. Yeah, that's right. I forgot. Last year was the strikes. The year before was VidCon. It just fate just kind of deems this summer vacation, even though it's not a vacation because we're always doing something else.
Yeah, we're doing stuff. It's not like we're getting time off for this. So
I mean, candidly, I'm getting dental surgery that takes place in 6 installments, so it's going to be rest, but I won't just be hanging on Malibu.
I'm just going to throw ice at your face. That'll help, right?
Right. No, all that's going to happen is I'm just be eating soup, and Lucy's going to be trying to like snuggle my face.
And if she's going to do it at the worst times.
I'll give her this. Maybe it's the cat instinct or something. Like, she knows how to make, even if it's just a little bit better, make things that feel better. Because, like, whenever I got my COVID boosters, she could just smell the sick on me. I wasn't sick, but I, have the reactions. I always have a nasty reaction. And she would try to keep me warm when I was cold. And I was like, well, a little 10-pound, 1 foot long body. That little section is like warm, but thank you.
Well, on that note, thank you all for joining us. If you have any thoughts, make sure you drop them into the comments for either the YouTube upload or the official Instagram post about this episode. If you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on the podcast app of your choosing. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, and CastBox. I think the only phrase that can end this season is remember it.